"Get your things and get out of my house, old man. You're a guest here, and your welcome has officially run out." The words, sharp and cold as ice shards, hung in the air of the living room I had built with my own 2 hands. My son-in-law, Mark, stood there with his arms crossed, a smug, contemptuous smirk plastered across his face. His chest was puffed out, a caricature of a man asserting dominance in a territory he never conquered. My daughter, Sarah, stood behind him, a little to his left, looking at the floor. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her silence was a blade twisting in my heart, a betrayal far deeper than his boorish cruelty. I looked from his arrogant face to her downcast one, and in that moment, something inside me, a soft and forgiving part that had endured years of subtle and not-so-subtle slights, finally shattered. It was replaced by something cold, hard, and utterly resolved. He had no idea. He stood there in my home, a home bought with my sweat and my late wife's dreams, and called me a guest. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought he was throwing out a feeble old man. He had no idea that in exactly 3 days, I would be the one returning to hand him his eviction notice, not as a guest, but as the rightful owner he had so foolishly forgotten I was. The memory of buying this house felt like a story from another man's life. Eleanor, my beautiful wife, had seen the listing in a local paper. It was just a plot of land then, with a majestic old oak tree right in the center. "That's it, Arthur," she had said, her eyes sparkling with a light that could outshine any star. "That's our forever. I can see it. A porch swing right there, a garden over here, and a window in the kitchen where I can watch the birds while I do the dishes." We weren't wealthy people. I worked construction, long hours of back-breaking labor, and she was a school librarian. We saved every penny, lived frugally, and poured every ounce of our beings into the dream of that house. I did most of the finishing work myself to save money. I laid the hardwood floors, board by painstaking board, thinking of the grandchildren who might one day run across them. I built the stone fireplace, imagining cozy winter nights with Eleanor curled up beside me. Every nail, every tile, every coat of paint was a testament to our love and our shared future. It wasn't just wood and brick. It was the repository of our hopes. For 25 years, it was our sanctuary. We filled it with laughter, the smell of baking bread, and the quiet comfort of a life well lived together. It was in this house that we celebrated Sarah's high school graduation, cried together when she went off to college, and danced in the living room on our 30th wedding anniversary. Then the silence came, started quietly, a diagnosis that felt like a cruel joke. Cancer. It stole Eleanor from me, piece by piece, until all that was left was the hollow echo of her laughter in the empty rooms. The house, once a source of immense joy, became a mausoleum of memories. Every corner held a ghost. I'd see her in the garden, tending her roses. I'd hear her humming in the kitchen. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. After she was gone, Sarah was my rock. She was grieving too, of course, but she was strong. She would come over, make me eat, and just sit with me on the porch. Neither of us saying much, just sharing the quiet burden of our loss. It was during that fragile time that she met Mark. On the surface, Mark was perfect. He was handsome, ambitious, and utterly charming. He said all the right things, doted on Sarah, and treated me with a deference that felt almost too practiced. He called me sir, listened intently to my stories about Eleanor, and praised the house constantly. "You built a masterpiece, Arthur," he'd say, running a hand over the fireplace mantel. A real family home. I had my reservations. A small, nagging voice in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite place. His charm felt like a well-rehearsed performance, his compliments a little too smooth. But Sarah was so happy, happier than I had seen her since before her mother got sick. She was in love and she was healing. How could I stand in the way of that? I wanted to honor my promise to Eleanor, the one I made at her bedside, to always look after our girl. Seeing her smile again felt like the sun breaking through the clouds after a long, brutal winter. So I silenced that nagging voice. I convinced myself it was just a father's overprotective nature, a relic of an older, more cynical generation. They got married a year later. It was a beautiful ceremony. Seeing Sarah walk down the aisle, she looked so much like her mother that it took my breath away. Mark stood at the altar, beaming. In that moment, I let go of my last reservation. I chose to believe in the future he was promising my daughter. Their first year of marriage was a struggle. They lived in a cramped apartment with paper-thin walls, both working long hours to chip away at a mountain of student debt. Mark's ambition was running headfirst into the wall of financial reality. He grew frustrated, his polished charm beginning to crack under the strain. He complained constantly about their lack of space, the noisy neighbors, the injustice of it all. Sarah would call me, her voice strained, trying to put a brave face on it. I knew they dreamed of a home like the one she grew up in, a place with a yard and a future, but it was completely out of their reach. That's when I made my offer. The house was too big for me, too full of ghosts. My footsteps echoed in the hallways. I was rattling around in a 4-bedroom home meant for a family. Move in, I told them one Sunday dinner. Live here. Fill these rooms with life again. It's what your mother would have wanted. Sarah burst into tears of gratitude. Mark's face lit up with a look of triumphant relief that, in hindsight, I should have examined more closely. He saw a solution to his problems, a shortcut to the life he felt he was owed. Arthur, we can't accept, he said, the words a hollow performance of humility. This is your home. It's a family home, I corrected him. And you are family. All I ask is that you cover the property taxes and utilities, and that I can keep the downstairs suite. I don't need much space. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. They would have the home they dreamed of, and I would have my family close, chasing away the loneliness that had become my constant companion. But I wasn't a fool. Even in my grief, and with my desire to see Sarah happy, a lifetime of hard work had taught me to be cautious. I'd seen too many families torn apart by money and property. Before they moved in, I met with my old friend and lawyer, Bill Henderson. I explained the situation. Don't just sign the deed over, Arthur, he warned, peering at me over his spectacles. Gifts can get messy, especially in a marriage. Let's protect you. Let's protect Eleanor's legacy. So we did. We set up an irrevocable trust. The house was transferred into the trust's name. I was the sole trustee, which gave me complete control. The terms were simple. Sarah and her husband were granted the right to reside in the property, rent-free, under the condition that they maintained it and that my right to reside in my suite was honored. The trust stipulated that upon my death, ownership would pass to Sarah. It was a clean, simple, and ironclad way to ensure my wishes were followed and to protect my most significant asset. When I explained it to Sarah and Mark, I framed it as an estate planning tool, a way to avoid probate taxes down the line. Mark nodded along, his eyes glazed over with talk of legalities. The only word he seemed to hear was house. He didn't care about the details, only the prize. He thought he had won. He assumed the house was, for all intents and purposes, his. For the first couple of years, it was wonderful. The house was alive again. The silence was replaced by the sounds of a young couple building a life. The smell of Mark's grilling on the patio. The sound of music playing on a Saturday afternoon. I kept to my suite for the most part, but we shared dinners, watched movies, and for a while it felt like a real family. I felt useful, helping with repairs, tending the garden Eleanor had loved so much. It was a peaceful time. But peace, I've learned, can be a fragile thing. Mark got a big promotion at his firm. The new title came with a bigger salary and an even bigger ego. The change was gradual at first. It started with little things. He began referring to it as my house in conversations with friends. We should have you over to my house for the game, he'd say on the phone, a proprietary tone in his voice that grated on my ears. He started talking about renovations. We need to update this kitchen, Arthur. It's so dated. He didn't ask for my opinion. He informed me of his intentions. My role began to shift from father-in-law and homeowner to something more akin to a tenant, and a bothersome one at that. He'd make comments, thinly veiled insults disguised as jokes. Still here, Arthur? Don't you have some shuffleboard tournament to get to? he'd say with a chuckle as he walked past my chair in the living room. Sarah would offer a weak, pained smile. "Oh, Mark," she'd murmur, but there was no force behind it. She never told him to stop. She never defended me. She was caught in the middle, and she chose the path of least resistance, which was to appease her increasingly arrogant husband. Her complicity was a slow-acting poison. Every time she stood by and let him chip away at my dignity, she hammered another nail in the coffin of our relationship. I would see the guilt in her eyes, a fleeting shadow of the respectful daughter I had raised, but it was always quickly replaced by a weary resignation. She had made her bed with this man, and she was determined to lie in it, no matter how uncomfortable it became for me. The disrespect escalated. One day, I came home from my weekly coffee with friends to find the photos of Eleanor and me on the mantelpiece gone. They had been replaced by a large, abstract painting that Mark had bought. My heart seized in my chest. I found the photos unceremoniously dumped in a box in the hall closet. When I confronted them, my voice trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in years, Mark was completely dismissive. "We're just redecorating, Arthur. Trying to make the place feel a bit more like our own," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "Those old photos can go in your room." Sarah just stood there, wringing her hands. "Dad, it's just a painting. We didn't think you'd mind, didn't think I'd mind?" They had erased my wife from the heart of the home we built. They were trying to erase me. That was the day I stopped seeing them as family and started seeing them as occupants. My love for my daughter was still there, buried under layers of hurt and disappointment, but my respect for her marriage, and for the man she had married, was gone. The final confrontation began, as most fires do, with a tiny spark. I was watching an old black-and-white movie in the main living room, something I rarely did. I usually stayed in my own space, but I was feeling particularly lonely that evening. Mark came storming in, his face a mask of fury. "Can you turn that down? I'm on a conference call. This is a workplace for me now. You can't just be making a racket whenever you feel like it." He didn't ask. He commanded. His tone was dripping with contempt. "This is my home too, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I have a right to be here." That was when he snapped. The years of feigned respect fell away, and the ugly, entitled man beneath was laid bare. "Your home?" he scoffed, a cruel, ugly laugh escaping his lips. "You are a guest, old man, a freeloader living under my roof in my house. My generosity has limits." Sarah rushed in, drawn by the noise. "Mark, please," she begged, her voice a pathetic whisper. But he was beyond reason. He was drunk on his own perceived power. He pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Get your things and get out of my house," he snarled. "You're a guest here, and your welcome has officially run out." I looked at him, this small, pathetic man playing king in a castle he didn't build, and then I looked at my daughter, my only child, who stood by and let it happen. The heartbreak was immense, but beneath it, the cold, hard certainty of my plan began to crystallize. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply stood up, the joints in my old back creaking in protest, and walked to my room. He thought he had won. He thought he had finally purged the last reminder that this life he was living was a gift, not an achievement. He had no idea he had just signed his own eviction notice. I packed a small bag with shaking hands. Every item I touched, a framed photo of Eleanor, the watch she gave me for our 20th anniversary, a worn copy of her favorite book, was a fresh stab of pain. I walked out the front door without a backward glance. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't stay. I ended up at a sterile, anonymous motel off the highway. The room smelled of stale smoke and bleach. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, and for the first time since Eleanor died, I wept. I cried for my lost wife, for the daughter I no longer recognized, for the home that had been desecrated. The tears were hot and cleansing. When they stopped, the grief remained, but it was now accompanied by a cold, clear-eyed rage. He called me a freeloader. He called me a guest. Fine. It was time to remind the tenant who the landlord was. The next morning, I didn't call Sarah. I didn't call Mark. I called Bill Henderson. Bill's office was the same as it had been for 40 years, filled with dusty law books, the smell of old paper, and the quiet hum of a window air conditioning unit. He listened patiently as I recounted the whole sordid affair, his expression growing grimmer with every word. When I finished, he took off his glasses and polished them with a handkerchief. "Well, Arthur," he said, his voice a low growl, "I'd say his welcome has officially run out. The trust is ironclad. He has no legal standing whatsoever. The moment he violated the terms of your residency agreement by ejecting you, he voided his own right to be there. What do you want to do?" "I want to sell it, Bill," I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "I want them out. And I want it done fast." A slow smile spread across Bill's face. "I think that can be arranged. In fact, I think I know just the person to handle this." The person was a realtor named Carol. She was a whirlwind of energy, a shark in a designer suit with a smile that was all teeth. Bill had called her and given her the broad strokes. When I met her at her sleek, modern office, she already had a plan. She listened to my story not with pity, but with a kind of righteous fury. "Oh, we are going to have fun with this," she said, her eyes gleaming. "An arrogant, entitled son-in-law? That's my favorite kind of takedown. They never see it coming." She understood the need for speed and discretion. "We won't list it publicly," she explained. "No sign in the yard, no open houses. I have a list of cash buyers, investors, and developers who are always looking for properties in that neighborhood. They'll pay a premium for an off-market deal with a quick close. Give me 48 hours." She was better than her word. 24 hours later, she called me at the motel. "I've got him, Arthur. A developer. He loves the lot size. Plans to tear the house down and put up 2 smaller units. He's offering cash, 20% over market value, and he can close by the end of the week. No inspections, no contingencies. He's seen the property records and the trust documents. He's ready to sign tearing the house down." The thought sent a pang through my heart. The fireplace I built, the floors I laid, Eleanor's garden, all of it gone. But then I thought of Mark, smirking in the living room, and Sarah, staring at the floor. The house was already gone. It was just a structure now, tainted by their disrespect. The sanctuary had become a prison. Razing it to the ground felt like a fitting end. It would be a cleansing fire, erasing the stain of their presence. "Do it," I said, my voice steady. "Draw up the papers." The next 2 days were a blur of paperwork. I met with the buyer, a no-nonsense man named Mr. Davies, who shook my hand firmly and didn't waste time with small talk. I signed the purchase agreement in Bill's office. The money was wired to an escrow account. It was all happening with a ruthless efficiency that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. On the 3rd day, the day of the final walkthrough, I put on the dark gray suit I had worn to Eleanor's funeral. It felt appropriate. I was burying another part of my life today. Carol picked me up from the motel. She gave my suit an approving nod. "Look sharp, feel sharp," she said with a wink. "Ready to reclaim your kingdom, Arthur?" I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I was resolved. We met Mr. Davies at the end of the street. He had a clipboard and a stoic expression. The 3 of us walked up the driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under my shoes sounding foreign and final. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety and vindication. This was it. I rang the doorbell. Took a moment, and then the door was pulled open. Mark stood there in a sweat-stained t-shirt and basketball shorts. He had a gaming controller in his hand. When he saw me, his face twisted into a sneer of disbelief. "Are you kidding me?" he spat. "You actually came back? I told you to get out. Have you gone senile?" "I'm not here to stay, Mark," I said, my voice eerily calm. I was surprised at how steady it was. "I'm here for the final walkthrough." Mark blinked, his brain clearly struggling to process my words. "Walkthrough? What are you talking about?" I stepped aside, gesturing to the man standing next to me. "Mark, this is Mr. Davies. He's the new owner of the property. He's here to inspect the premises before the sale officially closes this afternoon." Mark stared from me to Mr. Davies, then back to me. A short, barking laugh erupted from his chest. The new owner? Are you insane? You can't sell my house, you crazy old man. My name isn't on the deed, but my wife's is. This is our house. Sarah appeared behind him, drawn by the commotion. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning horror. Dad? What's going on? Your father seems to be having a psychotic break, Mark sneered, turning to her. He's brought some random guy here claiming he sold our house. Actually, I said, reaching into my suit jacket. Your wife's name isn't on the deed. It never was. I pulled out the neatly folded document Bill had given me. A copy of the trust agreement. I handed it to Mark. The house is, and always has been, owned by the Eleanor Vance Living Trust. A trust of which I am the sole trustee. You and Sarah were permitted to live here under specific conditions, one of which was that I, too, was allowed to live here. When you threw me out 3 days ago, you violated that agreement. You voided your right to residency. Mark snatched the papers from my hand, his eyes scanning the page frantically. The smug confidence on his face began to crumble, replaced by a sickly, greenish pallor. The color literally drained from his face. He looked up, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. He looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading for her to tell him it was a lie, a joke. Sarah was staring at me, tears welling in her eyes. Dad, you didn't, she whispered, her voice breaking. You wouldn't what, Sarah? I asked, my voice as cold and hard as the stone of the fireplace behind her. Wouldn't protect myself? Wouldn't stand up for myself when my own daughter wouldn't? You stood there. You watched him throw me out of the home I built for your mother. You said nothing. You made your choice. And this is the consequence. Mr. Davies, ever the professional, cleared his throat. If we could proceed with the walkthrough? He said, his tone bored, as if this was just another Tuesday. I have a schedule to keep. The mundanity of his request was the final blow. It made the nightmare real. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a business transaction. Mark finally found his voice. It was a strangled, pathetic roar. No, you can't do this. Get out. All of you. Get out of my house. It's not your house, son, Mr. Davies said calmly, making a note on his clipboard. And according to this legally binding purchase agreement, I can be in it. You, on the other hand, have 30 days to vacate the premises before I have you removed for trespassing. The word trespassing finally broke him. Mark lunged toward me, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. But he didn't even make it 2 steps before Carol, surprisingly strong, stepped in his way, holding up a hand. I wouldn't do that if I were you, she said, her voice dangerously low. Assaulting a senior citizen is not going to look good on your record. Mark deflated. All the fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow, vacant despair. He stumbled back, sinking onto the stairs and putting his head in his hands. Sarah was openly sobbing now, her body shaking. Dad, I'm so sorry, she cried, the words muffled by her hands. Please don't do this to us. We'll have nowhere to go. You should have thought of that 3 days ago, Sarah, I said, turning away from her. Couldn't look at her. The pain was too great. I need to show Mr. Davies the foundation in the basement. The aftermath was as swift and brutal as the confrontation. The sale closed that afternoon. The money, more than I'd ever seen in my life, was in my account. Mark and Sarah's marriage imploded. Faced with the reality of his own colossal arrogance and the sudden loss of his comfortable, subsidized life, Mark's rage turned on Sarah. I heard from a mutual friend that the screaming matches were epic. He blamed her for not controlling her senile father. She blamed him for his cruelty and greed. They separated before the 30 days were up. He moved in with a friend, and she had to go back to renting a small apartment, the very fate Mark had been so desperate to avoid. I never saw the house get torn down. I couldn't bring myself to watch. I bought a small, comfortable condo in a quiet part of town, with a balcony that gets the morning sun. It's clean and new, with no ghosts and no memories. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on that balcony and think about it all. The pain of my daughter's betrayal is a scar that will never fully fade. I lost a part of my family that day, and that is a heavy price to pay. But I also regained something I didn't realize I had lost: my self-respect. I learned that love does not mean you have to tolerate disrespect. Family is not a license for cruelty, and you should never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. The ones you dismiss as old or weak or past their prime, because they are the ones who remember every slight, every injustice. And they are the ones who know better than anyone that a house is just wood and nails, but a home, a true home, is built on a foundation of respect. And when that foundation cracks, you have no choice but to tear it all down and start again.